Well, here we are back here. Happy Wednesday, getting you ready for the CFL Division Finals this weekend. The Marcast here live. Big announcements here coming in a second. Like and subscribe. We'll be here live from the Grey Cup next weekend. I'll give you all the details. Just in the living room today, couldn't bear to get everything set up. It's been busy times here in America, busy times with work and everything else, but we are here live. We have Jason back in the fold. We have Evan here, and then we have the Professor Andrew Murray who just got home. We will be your ragtag group here next weekend at the Grey Cup. But first off, Jason, how are you? We did last week with Anthony Miller, talk semi-division finals. Now we're here for the finals. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing good, Reed. It's exciting time of year, and I'm excited to be here, and the Grey Cup's coming up.
Evan, it's been a couple weeks, or it's been, I don't even know, a long time here. We got Evan back on talking CFL. We were talking pre coming on here. We're all locked back in. Jason and I said last week, it's been a long season. We're here to go. We're going to be in Vancouver next weekend. How are you, Evan?
Yeah, man, I'm doing well. Really excited for Grey Cup. Really excited for the games this weekend. There's only, 3 games left, but it still feels like we have so much, to get through and experience. But Vancouver should be great. I'm looking forward to that. I was just out there like 3 weeks ago, so won't feel too different for me. But yeah, man, looking forward to the show.
Yeah, and so we'll the Professor Andrew Murray is going to be here as well. He's getting parked, coming home from work, so he's working through his schooling, and his professoring. What's this Mike Mitchell texting on here? Mike Mitchell texting things in the group chat. Here's the deal. Like and subscribe. Like I said, we will be at the Lions Den live next Saturday. So this will be the last show you hear from us until next Saturday. We'll be there the 16th. Our credentials came in from the league. Appreciate that. And we'll get all our Grey Cup Festival and all of that figured out as well. But we'll be at the game. Dorothy, I always joke. We went over to her parents' house last week again. I said, Dorothy is a credential member of the CFL media here. So, that, you got to have that respect. But we will be there. Evan will be there. Andy will be there live in person. Jason will be there. And then we will have a bunch of guests. Farhan and Naylor, they'll do their run in. And I'm sure the Winnipeg crew will be there. Saskatchewan. I know Derek Taylor was CC'd on some stuff that I was on, as well as I want to get either in person or otherwise, like Rod Peterson, been talking with him. Maybe a Saskatchewan makes it in. I still have a gift for Rod Peterson here, so that would be nice to see him in person, but should be a star-studded affair. So like I said, like and subscribe. Make sure you're a part of all that. Should be exciting. Get us up to, what are we at, 4,000 subscribers now, trying to get to. Give you a couple free jerseys here, courtesy of Royal Retros. We will recap a little bit the semifinals here today, the division semifinals. We'll look ahead. Some news and notes. I want to talk to JC's article. Like, hey, did you know the BC Lions are going to be over the salary cap? We will talk through all of that. Evan, just because we haven't heard from you as much here, big games this weekend, kind of as expected with BC following to Winnipeg, to Saskatchewan, Toronto taking care of business. Any major thoughts of the weekend or anything else before we kind of do any deep dive stuff?
Yeah, those would have been the teams I picked. I could go over the East and West semifinal in depth. I'll wait maybe, till a bit later in the show or whatever. But yeah, it was relatively, I think it went just about as I expected. Both home teams taking the win, and, both teams I think deserved it. So, yeah.
Yeah, Jason, I'm going to pull up my tweets here because I was on a little bit of a rant here. Our team, thank God for the Commanders here, really suffering through Kraken. They're on, I think, a 5-game skid right now. BC missing. Mariners obviously had to live through Ohtani and all of that, getting that World Series. So, really, my life's kind of in shambles right now. Jason, what did you make of everything? Because, as expected, BC didn't have enough. Kind of frustrating there. So, what did you make?
Well, like Evan, I expected these two teams to win, obviously, but I thought they were both pretty exciting games. I think especially that first half of that Ottawa-Toronto game, we'll get to it, like Evan was saying, but it was one of the most entertaining halves of football that I think I've ever seen in the CFL in the last several years. So I think, it was a really entertaining weekend. I thought the quarterbacks in general played pretty well. And I think that is always a good thing for the CFL. And I think, ultimately, the 4 best teams, I think, in the CFL have advanced to this weekend.
And here I'm hearing glass break. By God, that's the Professor Andrew Murray's music. And Andy, how the heck are you? You're professoring right now? How's everything going on?
pre-professoring. I'm getting ready to pre-professor and then actually professor. But I'm all right. Good to see you, fellas.
Yeah, just spreading the news here. It'll be live next weekend. Grey Cup. Andy, what are you excited for? And I want to get your thoughts on the Lions' kind of downfall here. But thoughts here overall as we approach the division finals here this weekend.
I think these are matchups that, just to what Jason was just saying, I think these are the best teams in the CFL that are left in the field. I think for some people it might be annoying. It's a little bit of the same as far as Winnipeg. We're in the I wouldn't say the frozen tundra, because actually the weather report looks actually pretty favorable this weekend, which we'll get into. But still, it's in Winnipeg again. It's kind of like becoming that New England Patriots feel again, where it's like, oh, we're back here for the AFC title game. Well, we're back here for the West Final again, but deservedly so. And again, Saskatchewan more than deserving to be there. And Montreal, I think this is extremely exciting for them. Obviously, they've already won a Grey Cup. Now you have that absolutely raucous crowd in Percival Molson Stadium for a home playoff game. I have to double check when the last time they hosted an Eastern final. Maybe Jason knows that off the top of his head, but I can't quite remember the last time they did. But still, regardless, I'm really excited to just hear how boisterous and absolutely agonizingly loud it's going to be on my TV screen on this weekend.
Yeah, like you said, it's the four best teams. I've been having a lot of conversations lately with kind of Dorothy about all this kind of, ramping up. Okay, what's happening here? We're going up to Vancouver and all that. And yet, like, you look here in the playoff list, where it's 6 of 9 make the playoffs in the CFL. Like, I don't view that as like, okay, we are a playoff team. That's the success, right? Well, obviously, we talked with Calgary last year coming in and, eking in and hadn't missed the playoffs in how many years, and they get bounced. Jason, Lions, was this? I do not view this as success of any hand of them just making the playoffs and getting bounced. Do you view the BC Lions season as a success?
Absolutely not. I think anytime you're in a Grey Cup hosting year, the expectation, fair or not, in the CFL is to make the Grey Cup, or at least, like I said, make the Grey Cup, let alone win it. So I think, we went through this last year in Hamilton, a very disappointing year. We made the playoffs similar to BC, but we lost in the opening round in the division semifinal. So it's very disappointing for the BC Lions. I think they really were shown to be frauds, really. They talked a lot about how this team was different in style from the previous couple of years and how they were more of a physical team. We went out, we got William Stan back. We got, some guys that are better at defending the run, but ultimately those are the things that cost them in this game. And ultimately they couldn't match the physicality of the Roughriders. And it was a disappointing season for the Lions.
Yeah, I had a couple, and I want to talk through a little bit of Rick Campbell's kind of post stuff on here. Evan, do you have anything else to add to this? And then we'll circle back. But I got a couple of tweets I want to pull up that just kind of spurs my memory. Anything from you, Evan, just about the Lions in general, and then we can kind of deep dive the games here.
Yeah, I mean, look, like Jason said, it's obviously a disappointing season, and with what Amar Doman has done, bringing 50 Cent in there for the opener, hosting the Grey Cup this year. Whole list of things, that they did to kind of make this, the magical season, and they regressed, right? I mean, the first 2 years where BC, was in that West Final against Winnipeg, it was, disappointing end to the season, but there's a lot of positive takeaways. And this year, it felt like there was a lot going on there, right? I mean, you bring in Nathan Rourke midseason, that's a whole different thing. Not really going to get into that because I think that's going to take too much time, but there was a lot going on and ultimately it didn't work out. So I think there's a lot of, maybe difficult decisions that'll have to be made there in the off season. We'll see what happens. I'm not saying that anybody's going anywhere, but I definitely think, Amar Doman has some things to consider. But yeah, I mean, ultimately it's a disappointing season for them. And I remember, I kind of bought into the hype, before the season started that, this was going to be the year where it all, came together and you're hosting the Grey Cup and they were finally going to get past Winnipeg and all the things that, had kind of been said for 2 years or whatever up to that point. And it didn't happen. So, it's unfortunate, but, I'm hopeful that they'll be able to rebound. And again, they've committed to Nathan Rourke now as their quarterback. So that's your starting point for whatever happens moving forward.
Andy, I kind of look at 2 years ago when we went up to Regina, and there was kind of a lot of lament of the Rough Rider fans, and they weren't in it and they didn't show up, and how disappointment. But this feels wildly different because I don't think Saskatchewan was necessarily a great team at that point. I think they were fine, kind of trying to figure their way. Where BC, it feels like they really win. It's like the New York Jets here. We went all in on everything. We got everybody, and we're trading for this, and we're signing this, and we're doing that. So it feels. Am I right in feeling like this is even more kind of embarrassing? If that, I do think that's the right word.
I mean, it was style and hype over substance, and the substance was a 9-9 season. In fact, to Jason's point, I think he made on your podcast about a month or two ago about the curse of of Rick Campbell. I mean, he goes 9-9 like he usually does. He's 82, 92-2 in his career. Yes, he's bought himself a lot of currency as far as a head coach, as far as his finishes. He's won a Grey Cup. He's been to another. He did a lot in Ottawa. He seems like an outstanding success in Ottawa, considering what it's been like there recently. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, this is about a step below a colossal failure. I mean, they absolutely had all of these pieces that they brought in. You bring in Christian Covington, you bring in Matthew Betts, you bring in Nathan Rourke, the godsend, and what do you have to show for it other than you don't even get to host a playoff game? I mean, that's really the biggest thing to me is the fact that they didn't even get to host a game in the playoffs, which they've done in the last 2 years. I mean, if you travel for the Western Final, fine, but not even being able to host in the semifinal, I think to me was really kind of the marker of just how far this had fallen off. And for me, I mean, I think there was just so many mismanaged steps. The roster construction, for one. The thing that really gets me about this team is the lack of physicality, especially on the offensive and defensive lines. I mean, their offensive line just got beat every single week, no matter if VA was in there or whether Rourke was in there. I mean, they were just getting pounded when the pass rush came and kind of pinned their ears back. Their defensive line just could not stop the run, which I know you've been on and on about, Reed. I mean, AJ Ouellette looked like he was revived. And even if they'd moved on, they would have had the same problem against Brady Oliveira again. So for me, it was a roster construction standpoint, but it was also just a mismanagement of, you could say possibly behind the scenes personalities. I don't know if we're going to get more details on what happened. It'll be really interesting to see what VA says when he leaves BC. I'm very curious to see what he says once he leaves and if people get the chance to ask him. But yeah, I mean, it just, as I said in the chat a few days ago, I mean, it just felt like such a wet fart of a season, and you promised the sun and the stars, and this is what happens.
Yeah, they had the post, or I guess like the season wrap, whatever. What was this on November 4th, a couple of days ago? And I mean, I really thought that this kind of exemplified kind of everything we've talked about with BC this year. And they had the quotes, we had Nathan and BA on here, and then Neil and Rick. And Rick's quote was, talking about being able to host the, obviously we're not here and not able to host a Grey Cup. He goes, "That's too bad, but we'll have to get over it." Like, if nothing else of that, like, that's too bad, we got to get over it. Like, how many years here is it, we're set up for whatever, and like, well, that's too bad, we have to get over it. Like, that's all you have to say to your fans. Like Andy said, to not even host the semis, to not even get one playoff game in this. Now you're trying to, I'm getting the emails from BC, and obviously we're going to be part of the Lions Den there doing the show, but like, hey, there's still going to be a lot of fun stuff here. Hey, still show up. Like, it's hard, where you're still trying to revitalize and build that fan base. I know we've seen a big resurgence with Lamar, but that's not something that you can take for granted. I laughed when whoever, Andy, whatever, like, yeah, we brought in 50 Cent. I'm like, man, that seems like a fever dream ago. Like, oh yeah, remember that at the beginning of the season when we had 50 Cent? But yeah, even from a game standpoint, I'm sitting there and I'm watching it, and Jason knows, and anyone that's been on the show this summer, like, I've done my best to kind of recap everything for me, the day of, so Jason and I can kind of do these shows because I've been traveling a lot with work, and I'm turning on the game and I watched the start to finish both games. I told Dorothy, I said, like, we got to work now. We got to be serious. I got to get in on this. And I'm like, oh yeah, AJ Ouellette, like, huh. And then, really hasn't been a major focal point, right? The last 5-6 weeks, it feels like a lot of the season where he was kind of like, Thor Hammer coming in Saskatchewan. And then, yeah, he was the biggest star of the day. They couldn't do anything. It looked like he was the greatest player on the field. And to Andy's point, even if you get through AJ, you got Brady next week. So it's not even like, oh, phew, we kind of figure that out. Here you look at even the Commanders right now trading for Marshawn Lattimore. Like, hey, God forbid, like we understand what our weaknesses are and we try to like, hey, let's get some players and fix that. The fact that Neil and Rick and all of them have had the same problems with the team for the last 3-4 years and seemingly have had nothing to do to kind of fix that is just mind-boggling to me. Jason, thoughts on the game? Let's talk BC and then we can kind of reverse since we're already on that. But thoughts on the game? My tweet was you can't spell embarrassment without BC Lions. That was my tweet during the game. If you want to know it, if you want to know where I'm at, Jason, what did you think?
Well, I mean, the game was tied at halftime, so it definitely was not, a blowout by any means. But I think that, in the second half, like I said, it really was the physicality of the game that the Roughriders, committed to running the ball throughout the game, whereas the Lions did not. They could not establish the run. I think a stand back 7 carries for 27 yards. That's just not going to cut it in providing balance for your offense. And then there's too much pressure on that really weak BC offensive line in pass protection. And ultimately, you'll see that affect their ability to win that game. So, it was very disappointing to see from the Lions. I mean, I don't think Nathan Rourke would have done much better if he was in there. I think it was just the style of the team and where they've decided to prioritize, spending money on this roster that has been the continuous problem for this team over the years. But, in terms of Saskatchewan, I think that, Trevor Harris is still playing incredibly well. I think that, the running game coming alive, AJ Ouellette, even though it was against your BC Lions, Reed, I think, getting him going down the stretch, maybe he has his best 3 games of the season on the way to a Grey Cup. Who knows? But I think that is huge to have balance for that offense. And they also have Reichwell Armstead, who was a big part of the Ottawa Redblacks rushing game earlier this season before his release due to some personal fouls that he was taking there. So they decided to dress 2 American running backs for this game, which is pretty rare in the CFL, and it really worked for them. So it should be interesting to see how they deploy that against Winnipeg. I think having balance going into that game, we'll talk about it, but is going to be huge for the Riders. And yeah, ultimately, I think it just boils down to the physicality, and BC was not prepared to match what Saskatchewan was throwing at them.
But like we knew that anyway. Yeah, why wouldn't you double up on that? Like BC can't do anything to stop that at all. And to your point, Vernon or Nathan on one of my tweets, someone commented Nathan. I said Nathan would be in the locker room crying. Like I don't even want to hear anything that it would have been any different with him being in there. Like Vernon, played his ass off. I don't think he's to blame for that. My thoughts on Nathan and kind of how he's held everything has been long documented at this point, and kind of them acting like he's this untouchable golden boy that we should all kiss the feet of. I just don't think that that's how athlete culture works. And I understand Canada is different and the media markets, all that, but none of that would fly south of the border here. Evan, thoughts on the game? Because as Jason said, you kind of knew what Saskatchewan needed to do game plan coming in. They did that. I think BC's weaknesses on defense are very well known and well documented. What did you make of Saskatchewan here? And I'm full on. I tweeted out, and that was probably the biggest one I had CFL here. I'm all in Saskatchewan right now. I'm all in. This is a pro Riders account here for at least until November 18th. So, Evan, what did you make of the game?
Yeah, listen, I'll start by saying I didn't think BC played terribly. It just wasn't very exciting, but I don't think it was, an absolute disaster for them. What I will say, the main issue that I noticed in that game was BC couldn't convert on second down. I think it was 2/3 to 1/3 or something like that. It just felt like Saskatchewan, to Jason's point, they kind of put together these long, sustained drives and were just able to run the ball, chew clock, score points, and move on. So again, not exactly the most exciting form of football, although Trevor Harris, did hit a couple passes and exposed what I would say is, one of BC's greatest weaknesses, probably in their secondary. Trevor Harris has played some phenomenal football this year, by the way. I know there were some concerns, about him coming into this year just with his injury and his age. But he's played great when he's healthy.
38. He's 38.
Yeah, I know. Shea Patterson came in for a bit, to help out when Trevor was down, but he's back and up and running, and they're having a good time. On offense for BC, I think it would have been a lot better if Keon Hatcher and Alex Hollins got involved. They were pretty much non-factors in this game. And those are guys who you're paying a lot of money, to make plays. And I understand, look, it was a bit of a slower night, and whatever, but I was just hoping, maybe they could do a bit more. The wind was obviously a factor. Sean White, who's been automatic on field goals, Missed a couple of kicks, although you have to take into account that Sean White plays in a dome for most of the year. So when you get into those weather conditions, it might be a bit harder, to kick. And I think Sean White's a great player, outstanding kicker, one of the best in this league. He's been doing it forever. And I don't think, even if he had made those kicks, that it really would have changed, much in the game. I felt like from early on, kind of in the first quarter, that Saskatchewan was really setting the tone. I know BC had that quick score early, but from there on out, it just, it was ground and pound Saskatchewan is what it felt like to me. So what else do I have here? Just Saskatchewan converting on second down when they needed to. I felt like the real turning point in that game, the last thing I'll really say about this is Marcus Sales getting that interception off Vernon Adams. I felt like that was a pretty notable moment where I don't want to say it was a momentum shift, because I felt like Saskatchewan had a lot of momentum already at that point. You're playing at home, but Marcus Sales was a guy that BC let go, because they thought he was too old, and, he became expendable. And, there he is in a big moment, playing against his former team, coming up big. And, I think that's one of those things that, if you're BC, that maybe, I don't know how you think about that, just because, again, in that game in particular, I felt like the secondary, maybe didn't do enough. And if you had a guy like Marcus Sales, right, it might have made things a bit easier. So I don't know. Those are all things I took away from that game. But I expected Saskatchewan to win, and they did.
Yeah, and it was, right. BC scored first, right, led. Like, I never sat there and felt like, oh, this is momentum in this way, right? They missed the field goal or missed the extra point, and then the other score they had, where Vernon did kind of the quick kick, and then they were able to pin him, and then they only had to drive like 25 yards, whatever that was. Like, it was kind of like a fluky. Like, I didn't even take that as like, okay, well, you basically had to. I don't know. It didn't feel like you drove the length of the field there. It kind of felt like you pinned them deep, and then were able to use the field position, which, okay, the CFL, like, okay, it's all about field position. But, it just felt like I would like to see this team do some sustainable drives here. Andy, thoughts on the game itself?
Yeah, actually, to piggyback a little bit off of what Evan was saying, when you mentioned Keon Hatcher, I actually did think they were trying to get him involved. He had 8 targets and only 2 catches, and I distinctly remember a couple plays where, like, he either ran kind of an incorrect post route, I believe was one of them, and then he had a drop in another instance. There was also another one where Vernon, I think, kind of overthrew him. So, like, they were trying to get him involved, but the chemistry just wasn't there. Another guy that just absolutely fell off the map for BC in the second half of this season was Alexander Hollins. I mean, he was on fire the first 2 months. I know Jason could attest to that in that game against Hamilton when he just went off in the first quarter. But we haven't really seen that from him since. He kind of faded away. Justin McInnes was spectacular the entire season. He obviously, all-star mention, he was fantastic. But I just kind of want to switch back over to Saskatchewan for a minute here, because I think there needs to be more said about Corey Mace's job that he's done with this team, and for a couple reasons. One, love to see that Trevor Harris kind of got to finish the season. I sat here with you months ago and boldly predicted that he would lead the league in passing, which the Alouettes flight decks guys looked at me like I was nuts. And to be fair, his injury concerns definitely came back up. He got hurt during the season, and it kind of hampered their offense. But the biggest thing to me is just how Corey Mace was able to kind of overturn the culture, really. And it wasn't easy. There was that span of weeks where they just kept losing close games, and they were just so close, and the margins were so razor thin, and they kept dropping those games in like August and September. And then they had that infamous report where they like called off practice because Mace was just upset at the team and just said, "I've had it with you guys." I think he really kind of got them all roped together and really got them playing outstanding football down the stretch, and it showed up here. I mean, like all of you have been saying, they just were more physical. They showed up on the prairies. The wind was just gusting through. Also, fantastic strategy for them to play with the wind as opposed to into the wind, especially in the fourth quarter. They planned that out very well. So I have to give it to Saskatchewan too. I think this is an immense turnaround, especially considering how they've ended the last 2 seasons. And Corey Mace, absolutely, for my money, earns the Coach of the Year nod. I know, those ballots have been turned in and everything, but that for me, I think really it stands out just what he's done with this culture. So, well, yes, part of it is BC's failure. I also think Saskatchewan was just able to kind of turn it around this year.
Yeah, like So you mean when Corey Mace came out as a leader of men and yelled and motivated their team, as opposed to being like, "Wow, it's too bad, we got to get over it." Like, I am a fan of, I like hard nose. I like mean coaches. I know the new thing nowadays is the cool vibe, and I think Dan Quinn with the Commanders is kind of the balance of that, of culture building, but kind of being the cool guy. I don't think you need to be Bill Belichick, kind of screaming or whatever at people, but I do think that the dichotomy there of Rick Campbell being like, "That's we did our best." Like, I think that there's a clear difference of that. Jason, any comments on any of this stuff? I want to just touch on this Lions stuff before and we can do the other stuff, and if anyone else has. But anything else on this, on the game, Sask or the Lions?
Yeah, Corey Mace has done a fabulous job this year. It's really been remarkable, and it's nothing too crazy. I think he's just really worked on the fundamentals of this team. They stopped the run. I believe they had the number one rush defense in the league this year. They got their veteran quarterback back, and he was able to play most of the season. I mean, unfortunately, not all of the season, like Andy was alluding to. But I think and they brought in A.J. Ouellette, who was not a big difference maker in the regular season, but going with those all-in moves, I think, has really, given some positive momentum to the franchise. And Corey Mace, I think another thing is that he's done a really good job with the defense in particular. So many takeaways this season, and that played a huge role. Again, Marcus Sales interception in this game. And I believe Vernon Adams threw 3 interceptions in this game. So they led the league in turnover differential this year. So that's always a key stat to lead the league in. And I think, if they want to beat Winnipeg, that's one thing they'll probably have to do in that game.
To Jason's point, real quick. They have like a turnover differential plus 28, which is nuts. That is absolutely an outstanding statistic. I just wanted to allude to what you were saying.
Evan, any other comments? And I want to talk this just real quick, BC looking into next season here, but any other comments on this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, look, Saskatchewan's got a great culture. They're the one team right now. They're kind of the odd man out in the sense, not odd man out, but they're kind of unique in the sense that out of the 4 remaining teams, they're the only one who wasn't in this position last year. It's been 3 years since they went to the West Final, against Winnipeg, and Winnipeg went on to win the whole thing against Hamilton again. But it's a fun team. Like, it's a really fun team, and I think, their defense, it's good. I still don't know if it gets enough credit. I think Roland Milligan brought a lot of attention to that team with what he's done this year. But they have playmakers on defense all over that place. Shout out to Jordan Lennon, who's a defensive assistant over there. I talk to him every week. We talk about guys and whatever, and I'm like, what do you think of this guy? And they seem to have a really good operation, again, in terms of culture, getting guys to buy in. And I think that goes a long way. Again, we'll get into the preview for Winnipeg, Saskatchewan later, but I'll bring up that culture thing again because it might be important, for a game that's this big coming up.
I want to get just everyone's thoughts real quick on this. We had the article with 3 down that JC had talked about. BC going over the salary cap this season, which I replied in the group chat like, yeah, no S Sherlock. Like, obviously we went over that, but I was watching Farhan's post game, and obviously he'll be part of the Grey Cup show next week. But talking about like, well, obviously they're going to have to like rework Nathan's salary and the marketing. I'm like, what are we like? Really? Like, we're already talking about like this is already a mistake, or this is already like curious. Just kind of, Andy, we'll start with you. Just your thoughts. Like, I don't know. It already feels like we kind of got cold feet on this, or like, well, now we're gonna have to go. We don't know if it. I don't know. This seems kind of like a mess. I want to get your thoughts because you haven't been on here in a while.
Yeah, the mythical marketing cap is always like one of the fascinating parables that I think about in terms of how it's used at the CFL, which is not really used to like an extreme degree. Although I remember at one point, I think months ago, I was listening. I actually happened to listen to the 3 Down Nation podcast, and
I know you're an avid
I know, obviously. But John Hodge was saying some sort of like hypothetical of like, well, what if they paid like Lamar Jackson $40 million off the marketing cap? Like, well, that would never happen. But like kind of, I always wonder about like how that works. It's kind of like the same thing people in the NFL. I'm not sure how familiar with it, Jason, but like people always say that the cap is a myth. Like, people don't really believe that the salary cap exists. But in this case, I mean, if that's how they're kind of phrasing it, well, then maybe there is buyer's remorse on how much they're giving Rourke. I mean, like I said, his performance was not very good this year, but you know, this is the thing. Are you buying into this version of Nathan Rourke or the one 2 years ago, and the one that, if given preparation and time, can be at that same level? But again, this is kind of what happens with athletes, and you guys were sort of talking about a little earlier, was sometimes you kind of get this currency as a player when you play so well for 1 year or for a couple of years, and you just kind of buy it. I mean, I still remember thinking that way. Just to give a random example, not a football player, but a basketball player, Derrick Rose. I mean, I loved him, and then he tore his ACL, and then he just kept having injuries, and everyone kept thinking, like, well, can he get back to that MVP season he had? And it just never happened. Like, sometimes you just buy currency as an athlete, and people just take a lot longer to kind of, let it go, because they really believe, like, well, maybe this is going to happen. Maybe it's going to happen now. Maybe this is, the magical MacGuffin. So it really depends. They're going to have to do that evaluation in the offseason, but the fact of the matter is they're not going to have their safety valve because VA is pretty much gone. So you better be damn sure you know what you're doing with that. And maybe that is what it is, but I don't know. It's hard to say because he's been away. He was in the NFL. He came mid-season, which I will admit is tough to just try and adjust and try to start games all of a sudden. Like he was going to start playing like he did 2 years ago. That was kind of an unrealistic expectation. But I think it's hard to be saying that you need to be restructuring the marketing cap after you promised all of that to him like 6 weeks ago.
Yeah, and he had the article out. I think he said, like, well, at least I know where I'm going to be next year. And I'm like, well, thank God for that. Like, I'm glad that you know now where you're going to be. Well, I mean, a perfect player example, Andy, you're talking about. I mean, all the allegations aside, is Deshaun Watson, right? Like, here, we've waited, 4 seasons now? Like, hey, is Deshaun going to get back to kind of what he was? It's good to know that in missing out on the 3 Down podcast, I'm missing out on conversations about Lamar Jackson being paid $40 million out of the marketing budget to come play. And then Zach Calero sending Jason Kelsey Winnipeg Blue Bombers merch and then not arriving in the mail. So it's good to know. It's good to know the conversations that they're had on there. Jason, thoughts on the Lions situation here, and then we'll I want to talk Toronto and all that. We'll get to the game preview, but we got an hour about all this stuff. I think we're doing okay.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't aware of, I didn't see what Farhan said about this. I thought that, like, obviously they're going to have some problems with this roster, just given the fact that where they finished the season, I think they have some obvious holes. So makes sense that they would want to free up some money, especially given the fact that Rourke's going to be given such a huge figure next year. So I think Nathan will probably be okay with that full season of preparation, like Andy was saying. But I think there definitely are concerns about it. I think that maybe it was that he wasn't fully comfortable there, just given the fact that Vernon was there, and it kind of still felt like his team. So that's what gives me hope going into next year. If he's the guy, and obviously they're going to move on from VA this offseason, and VA even said that himself. But I think that if you do that, I think Nathan's probably going to have some success next year and play a lot better. But they do have other problems on this roster, and I think as for why they went over the cap, almost every team that hosts the Grey Cup ultimately goes over the salary cap. It's just a pretty normal thing. I think people need to stop overreacting to CFL teams going over the salary cap. It's more like the NBA's salary cap, where you pay a luxury tax for every dollar that you go over. So I don't think people really understand that fully. And one final thing is, I want them to fully say how does this marketing cap work, or how does this marketing money work? I think they really need to start explaining that better. They put that in the CBA, obviously, when they agreed to that a couple of years ago, but I still don't understand it, and I follow this league on a daily basis. So, just your average fan trying to understand that must be a pain.
Yeah, 2 quick things, and we'll go to Evan. God bless Vernon. Like, his post game, he sounded really emotional about a lot of stuff. Like, really gone through a lot. And you remember, 2 years ago and being traded from Montreal midseason, and I think he was on the podcast at that point talking like, okay, well, I'm paying rent in Tacoma and I'm paying rent in Montreal. Now I got to get a place in BC. And then this year and the injuries and Nathan and all that, like, has to be a mess. But then I did laugh. Speaking of the luxury taxes and all of that, like, Dorothy the other day, we actually had a very insightful conversation where she's like, that's why I like football and not baseball, is because, like, she's like, the Mariners are never going to win because they're never going to spend the money right. And like in the football, it's a little more like, I'm like, this is a little bit more of a nuanced conversation I would have expected from Dorothy here after watching the Dodgers and all that. But Evan, any other thoughts on the Lions or Sask? And then we'll transition to Toronto here.
Yeah, simply put, I mean, they're paying Nathan Rourke a lot of money. And what I'm interested to see, next year in BC, regardless of who the coach is or what else is going on, what happens to the rest of the roster, right? Because as Jason pointed out, there's some holes on both sides of the ball they got to fill. For me, if I was, there sitting as the GM, if I was Neil McAvoy, I would probably look at the run game still. Look, they brought in William Stam back this year. I know he was mentioned before. I think he did his job, but I still think you need more than that. He was just like the one back that they could use, and then there wasn't much else there outside of that. So I would take a long, hard look at the run game, say, who are we going to add there, do a proper evaluation. They did trade for that guy, blanking on his name, from Montreal mid-season. I don't have the numbers on him.
Antwi.
Yep, Jeshurun Antwi, that's right. They got him, and that, I don't know, that was like maybe their move to bolster the run game rather. But we'll see what happens. Again, there's a lot of things I don't have. See, what's tough about salary, right? And especially, in the CFL is like I don't have, where every guy is at with his contract. It just sounds like they have some work to do. So hopefully they get started on that sooner rather than later. And again, just a really interesting situation overall to follow, whether you include the salary cap or not, what's going to happen with BC and, does Nathan Rourke get back to his 2022 form? I think it's worth pointing out, as good as Nathan Rourke was, and, we all bought into the hype. Like I saw him play in person, threw for like 400 yards against Edmonton. He only ended up playing in like 8 games, in the regular season and had the playoff game. That's a very small sample size. Like if you compare that, I don't normally do this, but like if you would, you compare that to like the UFL, right? Which is, look, it's different than Canadian football. I get it. Okay. But a UFL season is considered short. And, if you're a starting quarterback in the UFL and you don't lose your job or you don't get hurt, that's 10 games. So Nathan Rourke had less than 1 UFL season of tape in 2022. And since then he's gone on, multiple NFL teams came back to the CFL. I'll be interested to see what happens because, again, he came there, mid-season towards the end of the season, for BC. And I still think it was a bit strange, that they decided to play him right away, expecting that he was just going to be himself in 2022 and there wouldn't be any need to build up. I think, again, if I was the one making the calls there, I say, hey, Nathan, look, nice to have you back, but we're going to give you more time, to work with the offense and see how you fit and adjust back to the Canadian game since you've been in the NFL for a year. And then I would have just, maybe played Chase Bryce until Vernon Adams was healthy and then, gave Vernon Adams his job back as opposed to letting Nathan play all those games as kind of an experiment and then saying, oh boy, well now we've lost a lot, let's go back to Vernon Adams. And then, me and Reed were there last week of the regular season when Vernon played lights out. And, the last thing I'll say about all this, just because I know we're at like 40 minutes now already and we haven't even gotten to Toronto and Montreal, but Vernon's like the ultimate class act. Like I just love the way that guy talks. I love the way that guy presents himself in the media. He says all the right things. That's going to look really good, when you need to have a market, right? Because again, it's pretty clear that Vernon Adams is going to be out of there, barring a miracle or, they restructure the cap or he adjusts into a backup role. I don't know. Like I think Vernon Adams is good enough to be a starter in this league. Yeah. I know a lot of people agree with me on that. But again, the way he's carried himself through all this, I think, if you're another GM, wherever else, who's looking for a quarterback, you're like, that's the guy I want, to lead my locker room and to lead my team. So we'll see where he ends up. Again, another interesting situation to follow out of all this.
Evan, you stole my chess move. You stole my chess move. I was just about to interject and say that. Sorry to cut you off, Reed, but I just wanted to say real quick, I absolutely agree with you. And not only that, let's talk a little bit, just a tiny bit more before we move on about VA maturing as a person in this league. I remember 2 years ago, he got unceremoniously benched in Montreal and subsequently traded later on. And there was all that subtweeting that he was doing about getting replaced by Trevor Harris and kind of getting undermined by the team. And there was a whole question about his maturity and all that. I distinctly remember all that. And then when he got traded, he kind of took over when Rourke was hurt, but then Rourke came back and got his job back. And this time around, he had the job. Rourke came in, VA was hurt, and then kind of lost his job. And he kind of lost it for a while. But for him to kind of be the guy that he was that entire time really showed his growth and his maturity. And to Evan's point, I think he can absolutely be a primary starter in this league. And I'll go one step further, and this is just my personal belief. I think you can win a Grey Cup with him. I really do. In the right situation, I absolutely believe you can do that. So I just wanted to say that, and thank you for bringing that up, Evan.
No, I do 100% because there wasn't there the whole thing too, like he wasn't showing up early enough, or there like I feel like early on, like years ago, there was kind of that, and then I think the first time he was on the show with me, or one of them, and he's like, yeah, you know, I really kind of had to mature here and grow in and know that it's not just how I play, but it's kind of how I lead. It's funny because you know, BC basically, and we've talked about this before, basically fell over themselves to bring Nathan back, right? And really, like, if this was dating, and I understand the complexities of football are very different, but like, have some sense of like self-esteem here, like, oh hi, I'd like, oh please, like, what can I do to help you? And so, but what's ironic now is that the way that Vernon has handled everything correctly. I would say from a media perspective, almost now, I mean, I could see teams, and we have talked in here, falling over themselves to get Vernon next season. And I think Vernon's going to get a major contract here for a team, Calgary or Edmonton or someone wanting to do that. And it's just, how the turns table here with, the office and everything. Like, I think Vernon played himself into a better position this way. Last things for me, I think Rick should be gone. I would blow up all of that. I've had all of these people on the show. I think they're all tremendous. Neil and Rick, and we've had the same issues with all these teams for years. And Nathan never should have left. He should have got a full season. I said that at the time. He left too early. I understand betting on yourself, but win a playoff game in the CFL, and then try to kind of move your talents down south here. Let's talk about this. Let's get Jason on this. Toronto really kind of thrashed here a little bit. Drew Brown, 46 of 61. This was a wild game. Well, we won't do as deep a dive because I want to make sure we actually preview these matchups in full. But Jason, what did you make of this one?
Well, as I said earlier in the show, this was one of the most entertaining first halves of a game that I could ever remember. I think it was just, constant big plays back and forth. Every offense or each offense just making plays to stay on the field. And Ottawa looked very good and looked like they had a real shot to win this game early on, but ultimately they settled for a few field goals in the first half, and then they cooled off in the second half. Whereas Toronto just was a smooth oiled machine. They just kept on making big play after big play. Chad Kelly, I mean, say what you want about him, but he played a near flawless game in this one. Ottawa got to him a couple times early. I think Lorenzo Malden had a strip sack on him, but other than that, I think he was basically 20 yards a pass, just big plays down the field, just regular stuff that we've seen from him going back to last year when he won the MOP. So that is a great sign if you're an Argos fan going into this game against Montreal, that he showed he could do it in a playoff environment. And 58 points, I know they had a couple of pick sixes in there, but that kind of speaks for itself with how well this offense performed in this one. And Ottawa just gave up too many big plays, and that's ultimately been the story for them the last couple of seasons. They've been pretty weak in terms of their pass defense, and it really reared its ugly head in this game.
Yeah, this really high flying, really a lot of movement here. I laughed, and I had a tweet at one point. I didn't tweet it out, but when because Chad was pulled out for concussion or whatever for a couple of plays there, and there was that weird shot of the sidelines with the ref like fist bumping the Argo sidelines, and I said like, well, you got to let Chad back in the game because we all know what happens when you tell Chad no. That's cool. Andy, thoughts on Toronto and Ottawa?
No comment on that situation, but what I can comment on. You know what? I'm going to say, Evan, I think you're onto something about getting June Jones back into the CFL, because can we have the air raid every game?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Ottawa's game plan for a team that lost by 20. Can I say they just love their offensive game plan? Having 6 receivers, as crazy as it was, completely befuddled Toronto for an entire half. They were absolutely just gassed going up the field. I know they had a predictable situation as far as like running their pass rushers, but my God, like Ottawa is just running wild out on the on the field. I love that they had 6 receivers, and Drew Brown was really dialed in. I know he had the 2 pick sixes at the end of the game. He was trying to force it. He was trying to force a comeback, but overall, I thought he played really, really well. And I think this is extremely encouraging for Ottawa going forward. But really 2 things stand out. One, yes, obviously their secondary got absolutely eviscerated. I mean, when you as a quarterback are able to have more touchdowns than incompletions and almost by like more than double, I think that just kind of is a testament to your performance, but also that the defense is really doing nothing to stop you. Second of all, look, Reed, I know you're going to get on me about this, about the whole momentum thing, but just let me talk for a second.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Ottawa had a huge gaffe at the end of the first half where they tried to squib kick because they didn't want to kick off the Janarian Grant. Fair enough, because that's like kicking off the Devin Hester in his prime. But they hit one of the Argonauts players, and it was basically bounced into field goal range, and the Argonauts got a field goal right before half, and that cut into the deficit. And I think that did, like, for Ottawa, I don't think it would have ultimately mattered. They probably would have given up enough points anyways. But for you to have that kind of performance on offense and score a touchdown right before that, and then to give up points and kind of lose that a little bit going into the second half. I mean, Toronto came right back down the field and scored a touchdown. So there you go. 10 points, shifts over. They take the lead. I think that was kind of a bit of a, I do believe it was a bit of a momentum killer, even though ultimately I think they would have lost the game. So I know you were going on and giving me crap about it in the group chat, but I think it's just kind of a testament that coaching matchup wise, look, Bob Dice had a much better year this year, but Ryan Dinwiddie, when we were talking about coach of the year candidates, I can't believe Ryan Dinwiddie wasn't on the ballot from the East. I know Jason Moss had the team that won the most games in the East, but you lost all that talent and you didn't have Chad Kelly for half the year, and you managed to somehow squeak out 10 wins with this team, with, obviously Cameron Dukes and Nick Arbuckle getting major playing time. I mean, I think that was an outstanding, really just overall coaching performance by Ryan Dinwiddie. And ultimately, I think that's what took the Argos over the top.
Yeah, Jason, we were having a conversation in the group chat about how, the field goal and all of that, somehow them related to, Ottawa messing that up somehow related to them giving up 38 points in the second half. Like I believe in momentum in sports. I hate it because all of my teams, for the most part, seem incapable of adjusting from it. I just watched the Kraken play last night, and there was like this weird fluky, and it was offsides. They got scored on, and they challenged it, and then it was reversed, and then they sat there for 10 minutes, and then they re-reversed it. Like, at that point, you're like, well, the Kraken are never winning this game because, like, if anything, they're like, whoa! And it was like, I break my mic. It was like halfway through the second period, and you're like, well, this game's done. I do not believe that Ottawa messing that up related to 38 points given up in the second half. I will beg to differ with Andy on that. Evan, thoughts on this game?
Yeah, before I get into the game, I'm going to build off Andy's point because this is something I've wanted to say for a long time. At the beginning of the season, I said Toronto is going to be a team to look out for this year. And a lot of people said, no, they've lost too much talent. They're not going to be able to get over the hump. Chad Kelly's suspended. Everything's coming undone. I'll just give you some perspective here. Toronto, so the players that they lost after 2023, Jamal Peters to Hamilton, Adarius Pickett to Ottawa, AJ Ouellette to Saskatchewan, Javon League to Edmonton, Quantez Tigers to the NFL, being drafted by the New York Jets. That's a lot of key losses, no doubt. But then I look at the guys, who they added, and this is why I predicted them to be, a good team this year. And look, some of them were a surprise. Some of them I felt like were just underrated. Kadeem Carey from Calgary, doing what he's doing at like 33 years old for a running back is phenomenal. Janarian Grant from Winnipeg, it is amazing how he was a free agent for so long and that nobody wanted to sign him, and then Toronto brought him in, and he's probably going to win most outstanding special teams player. I mean, that's unbelievable. Again, they had Javon Leake, who was like the top return guy in the league last year, and I guess took over a place that had been owned by Mario Alford in Saskatchewan for a long time. Javon Leake goes to Edmonton, and then Toronto snags Janarian Grant, and it's almost better. Again, just an incredible turnaround there. Speaking of Edmonton, Jake Serezna, being traded from Edmonton over there. I believe it was for Curly Gittins, if I'm not mistaken. But, Jake Serezna, I mean, outstanding player in Edmonton, felt like he didn't get enough credit, and he's really, bolstered that Toronto defensive line this year. And then Ralph Hawley, another guy, former Philadelphia Star in the USFL. He really came along this year. He's a guy who I maybe thought, could have had, a vote for most outstanding rookie or should have been on the ballot. Unfortunately, he wasn't. There's a lot of offensive playmakers, including Makai Polk. He's on there, rookie out of Mississippi State. And then the two guys who have been there, that I just don't think have gotten enough credit, for a while now are try not to butcher this name, but Falarin Orimalade, and then who's a defensive lineman, and then Wynton McManus, the linebacker. I think both of those guys are very high impact players that got overlooked, during this cycle where everybody's talking about Toronto losing this guy, losing that guy. So a lot of credit, not only to Ryan Dinwiddie, but to the Toronto front office in particular, the general manager, Michael Pinball Clemens, and assistant general manager, John Murphy. Fantastic work with the roster. Even in that the East Final, which I'll get into the actual game now. You had guys stepping up who hadn't really done anything or hadn't done much all year. Jake Herslow, the receiver from Houston, who was supposed to be a UFL guy. Benji Franklin, another guy that could have played in the UFL. Both Herslow and Franklin had their rights with Houston. Tavares McFadden, who I thought it was really kind of interesting, where Wynton McManus, I think he had the interception and kind of threw it over to Tavares McFadden, and he ran it back for the pick six. And Tavares McFadden, was on the Ottawa Red Blacks roster at one point this year. And again, another former XFL guy. So there's a whole lot of lore there for, all of the people like myself who keep up with, player personnel and where this guy's been and all that. But anyway, looking at the actual game, I think a lot of it's already been covered. The main storyline here should be Chad Kelly redeeming himself. I mean, after that, meltdown in Montreal last year, probably one of the worst playoff games, especially by a guy who won most outstanding player. Nobody expected that. I think we're still all reeling from that to some degree of like oh, wow, like that really happened. But he went out there and, man, he looked exceptional. I mean, you talk about teams getting hot at the right time. I mean, I don't think what Toronto did there was a fluke, and I think they can carry that. They can carry that a long ways, maybe to the Grey Cup. That's certainly where I'm leaning right now. As for Ottawa, like Andy said, I'll give Tommy Condell credit. To not have like a traditional running back in the backfield. You've got Braylon Addison, Devontae Dedman, who's your returner. You're running a lot of those 5-6 receiver sets. For him to keep Toronto on the ropes like that for an entire half is pretty incredible. I didn't know what to expect, from Ottawa going into that game, whether their pass game would be able to make up for the lack of a run game that they haven't had for, some time now. But I also think it's ultimately the run game, that really hurt them because, look, I understand there were a couple, coverage busts by the DBs. That was pretty obvious. It allowed Chad Kelly to be really efficient, but I just don't, I don't know why there wasn't another running back option there. I mean, there were a couple guys. I think I'm not sure if Laybourne, the running back for Marshall, is still there on their practice roster. If he was, I don't know why, he didn't play or wasn't elevated. I had talked about it, privately before, but like Kevin Brown, who was 1,000-yard rusher in Edmonton last season, took a step back to Justin Rankin, who, came up from the IFL this year, in Edmonton, ended up being on the practice roster in Edmonton at the end of the season. But what that means is he was a free agent. And as far as I'm concerned, the interim GM in Edmonton, Geroy Simon, didn't sign him to a futures deal to keep him there. So he was a free agent. He was available, to sign going into that game, and they didn't make that move. And, I'm not saying he's like the only running back that would have made sense, but to have a guy, who had so much success last year, some success this year, just kind of ended up, kind of getting outworked by another really good running back. And, you just don't see that situation kind of – there's not players who are available like that all the time who have just, played a full CFL season. Now they can go join another team for the playoffs. I think that's it. Ottawa's offense obviously slowed down in the second half. I think Toronto just did a really good job at keeping pace, right? Like that first half, you could kind of tell they were hitting all the right, deep shots to Makai Polk and DeVaris Daniels. And then they came out of the locker room and continued to do that. like they didn't slow down, whereas Ottawa kind of, those long sustained drives on offense that they had in the first half just weren't there. And Chad Kelly was still dealing, they were still running the ball very well, and then kind of ran up the score at the end with 2 pick sixes. But again, fantastic game by Toronto. I again picked them to win. I thought they would win that game just based on everything. But they look real good. I think that's a team, again, we're not at the previews yet, but Montreal, they might have, a right to be concerned.
Yeah, we'll see if Toronto can carry that momentum into the finals here. We'll see. Let's go here. Game previews here. Get out of here. Andy's got to go work, and I'm going to go. My brother's a big John Wick fan. I guess they re-released John Wick in theaters. So I guess that's what we're doing tonight. Jason, I'll go to you first. Let's touch on both games. We'll go around the horn here. Toronto at Montreal, and then Sask at Winnipeg.
Yeah, so Toronto and Montreal, I think the main thing I'm watching is, do the turnovers from last year's East Final repeat themselves? Because we talked about last week, that was the main reason that Montreal was able to win that game against Toronto in blowout fashion. I think that if Chad Kelly can keep the turnovers to a minimal or 0, I think they have a great chance of winning this game, because they're a much more explosive team than Montreal. I think that, Montreal, that's the big question I have for them in this game. Can they hit those deep shots? And, it doesn't have to be anything crazy, but provide a couple of big plays to really loosen up the defense underneath and get them going. And I think Austin Mack is a guy I'm really looking forward to seeing if he can pop off for a big game. He's been pretty quiet and a little bit injured since he's been back from the NFL. So he's a guy I'm watching in this game. So those are what I'm looking for in that one. And then for Saskatchewan, Winnipeg, I think it's strength versus strength. I talked about Saskatchewan's run defense earlier being the best in the CFL. Well, you're going up against Brady Oliveira, who's probably the favorite to win MOP. I think that is the matchup to watch in that one, because Winnipeg's passing offense still hasn't been great in the entire season. If you take the whole body of work, they were certainly better the second half of the season, but they weren't the greatest throughout the course of the season. So I think that's what you're more concerned about if you're Saskatchewan. And then, can Trevor Harris translate to what he did, back in Saskatchewan on the road in Winnipeg, with the elements, I think, having balanced on the offense with Brady Oliveira, so AJ Ouellette and Raquel Armstead will be huge for that team. And it should be interesting to see what happens in these two games.
Let's go to you, Andy.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that we're getting a rematch of the Eastern Final, because is Chad Kelly going to be seeing ghosts again? And specifically, is he going to be seeing Marc-Antoine Dequoy again, who he threw that infamous pick 6 to really start off the absolute debacle at home that he had against Montreal? And again, Montreal's been awesome at home. Their defense has been fantastic this year. Tyrese Beverette has been just an absolute monster for them in the linebacking core. I just really like the fact that they get to host a home playoff game, and that those horns are just going to be working overtime. But for Toronto, to Evan's point, they have been playing outstanding. I know Reed can't wait. But to Evan's point, I really think it's been outstanding play from the Toronto Argos lately, and especially on offense. They've really found their groove. Chad Kelly's kind of come back into the form. Kadeem Carey, can he be a factor in this offense? Can Janarian Grant he had a return touchdown against Montreal. They upset Montreal. They actually got the first win against Montreal this year, earlier in the year. So they've done it. They can do it. It's very possible. You're talking about the last 2 Grey Cup champions in a final. Like, that's fantastic. I love that. I'll sign up for that matchup any day of the week. But we'll see. I think for me that matchup ultimately boils down to how well both defenses play, and I do think Montreal does have a bit of an upper hand there. To flip over really quickly to the Western Final, yeah, Winnipeg, I mean, standard quo, you just kind of play within your game. Interestingly enough, Saskatchewan did get 5 turnovers off of them in that last Western Final 3 years ago, and it didn't matter. They still lost by 4. Yeah. And to Jason's point, that's been their calling card all year. Saskatchewan is huge plus in the turnover margin. But can they make the plays when it matters? Winnipeg, time after time after time. I mean, they're on the verge of having their 5th straight berth in the Grey Cup. That is Edmonton Eskimos levels of history right there. So I don't know if they have the firepower as much this year. We kind of dogged them all year, but really, again, it's kind of the same thing in Montreal. Their defense has been really good. Their secondary is awesome. So I think for me, it's the home playoffs and the defenses at home that really I think could go a long way in dictating both of these matchups.
Last one, Evan, take it some.
Yeah, so in this Montreal-Toronto game, I think a big key for Montreal is, Cody Fajardo, finding some receivers. Like, I think a big, hit that team took early in the year was losing Tyson Philpott. He was doing some great things before he went down. The guy I'd look out for in that game is Charleston Rambo, former XFL guy. I think I talked about him on the season preview. Said, that's a rookie receiver, who might have a big year in the CFL. Of course, there were a lot of good rookie receivers this year in the CFL. Makai Polk, already talked about him. Shamar Bridges, Khalil Pimpleton. But I still like Toronto a lot in that game. Again, I just can't get over what they did against Ottawa. It was the definition of a complete game, all three phases. And I think if Montreal loses that game, you'll go back to that, bit about, they played BC, they weren't really, it was kind of a vanilla game for them. Then you get the bye, then you have a big playoff game. Is that necessarily a benefit? I think that's going to come up, if they drop that game. What I'm really focused on, though, and what I'm really excited for is this West final, because I think Saskatchewan, they are a team, this is the team who has the best chance to beat Winnipeg in a while, in my opinion. I think the way that team is constructed, you look at their backfield between AJ Ouellette and Raquel Armstead, and then you look at their defense, who I still think is a bit underrated, but a really good unit. Again, you talk about the turnover margin, a couple other things they've done great this year. That is, I think they're in a good spot to win that game. Now, with that being said, it's going to be a sold-out crowd in Winnipeg, 33,000. I'm not saying that Saskatchewan can't play in front of crowd noise. I definitely know they can play in weather, although as we've talked about too, the weather looks pretty favorable that day. So that one to me is very interesting. Again, I think to Andy, he said it perfectly. It's just going to come down to, can Saskatchewan make the big play in the big moment? Because we know Winnipeg can do that, and they do that a whole lot. That's why they've gone to, 4 straight Grey Cups on the verge of 5. It's going to come down to, in that moment. Again, very similar, I think, about the Grey Cup last year when Cody Fajardo, it was 3rd down. Once he got over that, you rattle off a couple plays, and then you win the game. Can Trevor Harris do something similar in this game? And I'll go out on a limb here, and I'll say if Saskatchewan does win that game, which right now I'm not sure if I would pick that outright, but if they do win that game, I'm giving them a good chance. I think that game might be bigger than whoever wins the Grey Cup, just because you're dethroning, what is essentially a team who, I don't know if we put the dynasty label on them yet, but I think that they're borderline. 4 straight Grey Cups is hard. It's really hard, and especially, you have to give credit to that organization. They went to 1 in 2019, had a season canceled in 2020 where there was a lot of uncertainty around the league. You didn't know. It was like the whole world was kind of collapsing around them. And then you come back the next year and you win. And then you go again, and you go last year. And I know the past 2 years they haven't been able to do it, but they've been so close in every game. Like, if you look at the past 2 Grey Cups that they lost, it's a couple plays, right? But if Saskatchewan can go in there and pull off an upset, I think that has, that will change the entire landscape of the CFL. I'm not afraid to say that. So I'm really excited for that game.
No, it should be good. Like I said, I'm going with Sask. My head says Toronto. My heart wants Montreal just because of the guys over there. But as you guys have said, I think Toronto's got enough firepower for that. We'll get out of here. I appreciate everyone. Like I said, we'll see you next week live from the Lions Den in Vancouver. Appreciate everyone hopping on, and we'll see everyone next time.